Hey guys, thanks for coming by the Wednesday night edition of I'm Still Playing. So the War Within expansion drops tomorrow. Well, at least it does if you order the Epic edition and gave them $80, which I did not. I gave them the $60 for the Heroic edition, which does give you all kinds of digital goodies, but does not grant you 3 days early access. It'll be Monday for me along with everybody else. And I just want to say right now that with the expansion dropping this week, well, technically next week, but very soon, it's quite likely the next several vlogs will be centered around World of Warcraft, and I just don't want you to think that I'm exclusively a World of Warcraft channel. That's not the case at all. But it's not every day that a new expansion drops for a game that you spent the last 20 years in, so it's kind of a big deal for me. And that's actually what I want to talk about today, is why the War Within is such a big deal for me, and why, honestly, it should be a big deal for you. At least if you're the kind of player that I am, which is to say you like campaigns, you like questing, you don't necessarily like group content, although you like seeing the story and participating in the story all the way through to the end. Because this is, without a doubt, the best expansion for the solo player. And that's what I want to talk about and what I want to explain to you today. All right, so you've got a level 70 character and the expansion has dropped and you're ready to get in there and start playing. And what's the first thing you're going to do? Well, obviously you're going to start playing the campaign, and that means questing. And that's one of the first areas that Blizzard has really done a lot in terms of providing some significant quality of life enhancements to the questing process. First of all, there are actually a ton of changes to the icons that are used for questing, all the NPC icons. So they did some of these changes in Dragonflight. They made some real improvements there. They've added even further in the pre-patch, and they're going to do even more in terms of UI improvements for the actual expansion. So for instance, they've already had the ability to distinguish between side quests and campaign quests and daily repeatable quests. And now they're going to add sort of some unique icons for the meta quests, because they were conflating those with the campaign quests and they weren't really kind of the same thing. So I'm glad to see that. Additionally, they're adding the notion of a hub, a quest hub, if you will. And the quest hub will appear as its own distinct icon on the minimap. And when you mouse over it, it'll show you all of the quests that are currently available in that quest hub. And it's even going to attempt to prioritize the quests that are in there, kind of sort them in order that it thinks that would be most relevant to you. So that's pretty cool. One of the other things they're going to do is, while you're looking at the minimap, they've added a ton of new filtering options for the kinds of quests that you'll want to view. And one of the great new filtering things is you can say exclude or include all of the quests that my warband has already completed. So when you're getting to the point of the game where you're just trying to do renown quests and what have you, you can gray out the ones that your warband has already done, so that you're not trying to repeat those same quests. And that's really exciting, right? I mean, I love the fact that they're, making it easier for you to progress through the campaign. I can see a scenario where perhaps my main only does the campaign quests and goes all the way through. But then my alternates decide to do all of the side quests, and they're the ones that actually learn about all of the zones. And Blizzard is promising that they're going to do more with side quests this time, so we'll see if that's actually what they end up doing. But of course, you're doing the questing and you're getting through the game and you're enjoying it. But inevitably, what happens, right? You'll get to a quest where it's like, oh, in order to finally see the end of this long quest chain that you've been going through, you're going to need to enter this dungeon. And if you're like me, that's probably like a point of anxiety right there off the bat. Because you either have up until now, you've either had one of two choices. You could just skip it, because most of the time it wasn't required to continue the story. So you're like, well, won't do that. Or you could say, all right, well, I'll queue up for this because I'm not in a guild, I'm playing by myself, but I want to do this content. So I'll queue up for it. And maybe you'll take the time to go to the internet and review a video on the particular mechanics in that dungeon. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll just raw dog it and just drop right in there and get after it. But either way, if you're a DPS, you're probably looking at another 30 to 45 minutes of waiting in that queue while you go off and do other things before you can actually get into that dungeon. So that's been the case up until now, all along. And now that is no longer the case because of this awesome system they introduced actually back in the middle of Dragonflight called follower dungeons. So what are follower dungeons? Well, they're essentially dungeons that you do with a group of NPCs. And they'll provide you with a tank character and a DPS character and a ranged or a healing character and a casting character. So depending on which class you are, when you queue up for the dungeon, they'll fill out your party with the appropriate other classes. And it's actually pretty cool. In fact, the AI for these dungeons, right now, only the Dragonflight dungeons and only the War Within dungeons are available for follower dungeons. And that's because they actually program the AI to do the right things in the dungeon, or at least to make a pretty darn good facsimile of it. So if you click the little button that says, hey, lead me through the dungeon, the AI will take off and it'll lead you on a path that runs all the way through the dungeon. It'll try to avoid most of the mobs. The tank will grab the bosses and then turn them away from the party. It's actually really pretty cool how good of a job the AI does in terms of knowing where to go and which mobs to avoid and which mobs to encounter. In fact, as an AI programmer myself, if I were working on Blizzard, on World of Warcraft right now, this is totally the system that I would love to work on, because I can see a lot of, it looks like a lot of fun for me, right, to build those systems. So that's actually really exciting, because this means a couple of things. For the first time, you can do the dungeons as you encounter them with the story, and if you're the kind of person that grouping with a group of random strangers gives you anxiety, which I kind of am, that's awesome, right? That means you don't have to worry about grouping with a group of random people. You can just do it and get it through, and you can take your time. In fact, one of the follower dungeons I did the other day, my wife called me and said she needed me to come pick her up. So I just quit the dungeon, and I didn't have to feel guilty about leaving on a group in the middle of a dungeon. It was awesome. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to follower dungeons and using them as I progress to the game. But then now you've reached the end of the game. And up until now, Blizzard has had essentially one of three activities you could participate in game once you finish the campaign. And that was, you could do PvP, which almost inevitably meant you would ultimately end up in arenas or unrated battlegrounds. You could do Mythic Plus dungeons, which would require you to either pug groups. You can't even use the group finder for that, but you have to pug groups. Or you have to be in a guild that does Mythic Plus runs. Or you could raid, which definitely did require you to be in a group that would put together raid groups. Well, that's not true either. My son will be the first to tell you that you can pug raids as well, normal, and he even pugged heroic. But well, there's just something in the mentality for doing that, because I am not pugging raids. You can do the LFR raids, which are absolutely, admittedly, tons easier, and they're available, and they were actually designed for casual or solo-oriented players like myself. But even an LFR raid requires a fairly significant time commitment on your part, right? If you're going to be a good team player, you have to at least spend a little time going over the boss mechanics before you jump in there. And then you have to hope that most of the rest of the people in your group have done the same thing, and it's quite likely that they haven't. So even LFRs can be a pretty big source of frustration, and quite often the gear you get from doing LFR isn't even as good as the gear you would get from just doing world quests. And so literally the only reason you're doing that is to experience a story or to participate in a raid. And I'll get back to that in just a little bit. But now they've provided a new in-game activity called delves. And I've talked about delves a little bit in the past, but what they are is essentially scaling instances designed for 1 to 4 players. Plus you get an NPC that has his own upgrade system that you can upgrade as you go along through the delves. And the cool thing about these delves, besides the fact that they're completely soloable or doable with 1 or 2 people, and they're completely class agnostic. So if you've got you and your buddy are both DPS, you can still participate in this content, is that they have tiers. They have their own upgrade system and scaling difficulty. So you can start off and you only, like for instance, only tiers 1 to 3 are available during the campaign, and it's not until the higher tiers don't unlock until you get after the campaign. And that's awesome, right? Because it essentially recognizes that, like a player like myself, I'm not necessarily casual. I like a challenge, and I like feeling like I'm on an upgrade and a progression path. I just don't want to do it with a group of people, or I don't have the ability to do it easily with a group of people or a group of random strangers. And I just want to say it's actually extremely gratifying to be finally, after 20 years, recognized as a legitimate kind of player, which is I don't group, I don't do a lot of random groups, but I still like a challenge. I still want to get gear for it, and I would still love an activity to participate in that didn't either require me killing other players or wishing I could kill other players, right? And so I love this. I am really looking forward to delves, and delves are probably the single biggest thing that drew me back to this expansion. But going back to the LFR raids, because as I mentioned before, I'm also the kind of player that wants to see the whole story, and I know you are too, right? And up until now, in order to actually get the final story, you had to participate in the in-game raids, at the very least at the LFR level. Now they did add a system in Dragonflight where if you didn't want to do the LFR, you could go visit an NPC and he would show you the cinematics that happened in the very last boss fight for the raid. And while not perfect, it's still better than nothing, right? So you could at least see the cinematics in-game. But for the War Within expansion, they've added a new tier of difficulty called Story Raids. And Story Raids are soloable. And what you do is you'll just drop in And I don't know if you're going to do all of the bosses in the raid. I think most likely you'll do either only the most relevant ones or the final boss in the raid. And there's a couple of different things that we know about story raids. For instance, we know, like I said, that they're going to be soloable. They'll take you to the last boss. You should get some loot from it, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near the best loot. But most importantly, you'll get to see the story and you'll experience the story, and it'll be your character who actually completes the story in an epic fashion, the way that you want it to. And there you go. For the first time in WoW's history, you'll be able to experience the entire story of the expansion without having to group with other people. You can do all of the questing, and they've improved that. You can do all of the dungeons, and you don't have to group up with another single person if you don't want to. You can participate in the raids at the end and get the story and see the cinematics and feel like your character contributed to the campaign all the way from start to finish. And then once you finish the campaign, there is an in-game activity designed tailor-made for you and for your kind of player, which provides progression and gear and upgrades and recognizes you as every bit of a legitimate player as Mythic Plus Dungeons and raiding players and PvPers, which is fantastic. A friend of mine recently asked him, like, Dusty, why are you playing World of Warcraft right now and why aren't you playing Final Fantasy XIV? And that's a fair question because I love Final Fantasy XIV. I really do. It is a fantastic MMO, and in many ways I think actually superior in terms of some of the mechanics they offer than World of Warcraft. But when I looked at it, I only have time in my schedule for one MMO at a time, to really dedicate myself to one MMO at a time. And when I looked over this list of features and these particular mechanics that were coming out with War Within, and I realized that they were really, sort of gearing a whole bunch of these mechanics specifically towards my kind of play style, I thought, yeah, this is it. This is the expansion that I want to play in. So I'm coming back to World of Warcraft. And if you chose to do so, well, I'll expect a commission. But in all seriousness, let me know in the comments if you've decided to come back and play and how your experience is. I'm actually really interested to hear what you people think. And if you too also find it sort of awesome that they're finally building an expansion for players like us. In the meantime, I hope to see you guys in game and hope to see you here at the channel as well. So you guys have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.